What if everything you've been told about this case wasn't wrong, but incomplete? For months, maybe even years, the story seemed clear. One suspect, one narrative, one explanation that almost made sense. But now, new signals are starting to surface. Details that were once ignored are suddenly becoming impossible to ignore. And when you line them up carefully, something disturbing begins to emerge. Because this doesn't look like the work of one person anymore. It looks coordinated. Multiple movements, multiple moments happening in ways that a single individual shouldn't be able to pull off alone. So the real question isn't just who did it, it's how many people were actually involved. And before we go deeper into this, if you're into real cases like this, where the truth isn't always what it seems, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and share it with someone who loves true crime mysteries. Because what you're about to see, most people completely missed. This isn't just another update. It's a completely different perspective, one that challenges the official narrative and forces us to re-examine every detail from the beginning. We're going to break down the timeline, the overlooked clues, and the inconsistencies that don't add up. And by the end of this video, you might realize that this case was never as simple as it seemed. Because if this theory is true, then we're not looking at a single killer. We're looking at something much bigger. The official story everyone believed. At first, everything about this case felt simple, clean, understandable, almost too easy to accept. An 84-year-old woman disappears from her home in the quiet city of Tucson, Arizona. There are no signs of forced entry that scream chaos, no loud neighbors reporting screams, no dramatic footage of a struggle, just a house and a silence that feels heavier than it should. Then comes the one detail that shapes everything. Blood was found inside the home. And in that moment, the entire story locks into place inside people's minds. Not missing, not lost, not confused, taken, and possibly not alive anymore. The media didn't hesitate. Authorities didn't hesitate. Even the public didn't hesitate. A narrative was built almost instantly, not because it was proven beyond doubt, but because it felt right. And that's the dangerous part. Because when something feels right, people stop questioning it. A story that made sense. Investigators described the case in a way that sounded familiar, comforting even in a strange way. A single perpetrator, a targeted act, a crime that, while tragic, followed a pattern people had seen before. An elderly woman, living alone, vulnerable. It fit too perfectly. Reports suggested that this was likely an abduction that turned violent. The presence of blood became the central pillar of the story, the one piece of evidence that allowed everything else to be assumed. Because in the human mind, blood doesn't leave room for many possibilities. It narrows everything down. And once that happens, people don't look for alternative explanations anymore. Why everyone believed it? There's something about the human brain that prefers simple answers. It's called cognitive ease. When a story is easy to understand, easy to process, and doesn't require too many moving parts, the brain accepts it faster. And this story, it was as simple as it gets. One victim, one likely attacker, one tragic outcome. No complications, no confusion, no need to dig deeper. Even the language used by authorities reinforced this belief. Phrases like, "Investigators are treating this as a suspected abduction. There are signs of possible violence at the scene. This appears to be an isolated incident." Each statement didn't just inform, it guided the public toward a conclusion, a single, clear conclusion. And once that conclusion settled in, it became the truth people carried. Not because it was fully proven, but because it was repeated enough times to feel real. The quiet details no one questioned. But here's where things get strange. Not loudly strange, not obviously strange, just quietly off. The kind of details that don't break the story, but don't fully fit inside it either. For example, there was no confirmed suspect, no arrest, no clear timeline of exactly what happened inside that home, and yet, the confidence in the single attacker narrative remained strong, almost unquestioned. Even as tips started pouring in, hundreds of them, authorities maintained a careful tone. They didn't confirm anything. They didn't validate any theory publicly. But the public? They had already made up their minds. The rise of certainty without proof. People began speaking about the case as if it was already solved, not officially, but mentally, in conversations, in online discussions, in quiet assumptions. It was probably someone who targeted her, maybe a robbery gone wrong, could have been someone she knew. All of these ideas had one thing in common. They all assumed there was only one person involved. And no one stopped to ask why. Why did it have to be one? Why did the story feel complete when so much was still unknown? Because the truth is, a simple story is easier to live with. It doesn't disturb you as much. It doesn't force you to imagine something bigger, darker, more complicated. The comfort of a closed narrative. When people believe a case is straightforward, they emotionally close it, even if it's still open in reality. They stop looking for new angles. They stop noticing inconsistencies. They stop asking uncomfortable questions. And in this case, that's exactly what happened. The official version, or at least the version everyone believed, became a kind of shield, a way to protect the mind from uncertainty, because uncertainty is harder than fear. Fear has a shape, uncertainty doesn't. But then something changed, not loudly, not suddenly, but slowly, almost invisibly. New tips started coming in, and they didn't match the story people had accepted, not even close. Some claimed there were 3 individuals involved, others suggested 4, and then there were those who claimed something even more unsettling, that the crime wasn't as simple as it seemed, that it wasn't a single moment or a single decision, but something planned, layered, and possibly connected to something deeper. At first, these claims were dismissed. Of course they were, because they didn't fit the story. And when something doesn't fit the story, people don't adjust the story. They reject the new information. The one detail everyone ignored. But hidden inside all of this noise, there was one small detail, so small that almost no one paid attention to it. The sheer number of conflicting claims, not just random guesses, but specific, structured claims, different versions, different numbers, different scenarios. If this was truly a simple, single perpetrator case, why was the information surrounding it so fragmented? Why weren't all the tips pointing in the same direction? Because usually, in straightforward cases, patterns begin to align over time, details start to support each other. But here, the more information came in, the less the story seemed to hold together. And that's where the story begins to crack. Not break, not collapse, just crack, slightly, almost invisibly. Because once you notice that something doesn't fully add up, you can't unsee it. And that's the moment everything changes. Not in the case, but in the way you see it. The moment you go from, "This makes sense," to, "Wait, does it?" And that question, that one quiet question, is what leads us to the next part of the story. Because if the official version was as simple as everyone believed, then why are there so many pieces that don't fit? Why are there voices claiming different things? Why are there details that feel incomplete? And most importantly, what if the story people trusted was only the beginning? Because the truth is, the official story didn't fall apart all at once. It didn't collapse under pressure. It started with something much smaller. something easier to ignore. The first crack in the story. At first, nothing felt wrong. Not really. Even after hearing everything, the blood, the disappearance, the silence inside that house, the story still held together. It still made sense. But then, something small happened. So small, most people didn't even notice it. It didn't come from a loud announcement. It didn't come from breaking news. It didn't even come from investigators. It came quietly, hidden inside the noise. A detail, a mismatch, a question that didn't have a clean answer. And this is where everything begins to change. Not completely, not all at once, just enough to make you uncomfortable. Because once you see it, you can't go back to believing the story the same way again. Think about this for a second. If this was truly a simple case, if one person entered that house, did everything, and left, then why does the timeline feel incomplete? No one could clearly explain how long the incident took. No one could clearly explain when exactly things went wrong. There was a day, there was a place, but the middle of the story, it felt blurred. And that matters more than people realize. Because in real investigations, timelines are everything. They are the backbone of truth. They show what is possible and what is not. So when a timeline starts to feel unclear, it's not just a missing detail, it's the first warning sign. The time gap no one talked about. There was a window of time not clearly defined where everything happened. But here's the problem. That window was never tightened. It stayed open, wide enough for multiple possibilities. If one person committed the crime, you would expect a clearer sequence: entry, action, exit. But instead, there was uncertainty. And uncertainty doesn't usually belong in simple cases. Now ask yourself this. If investigators were confident in a single perpetrator theory, why wasn't the timeline sharper? Why wasn't it more precise? Because either the information wasn't complete or the story wasn't. Behavior that doesn't fit. Now let's go deeper. Let's move past time and look at behavior. If one person did this, everything inside that house should reflect that. One pattern, one flow, one controlled sequence. But the details, the few that came out, didn't fully align with that idea. There were signs of struggle, but not enough clarity to understand how it unfolded. Think about it carefully. An elderly woman, inside her own home. If a single attacker entered, there are only a few likely scenarios. A quick, forced act, a sudden confrontation, or a controlled interaction that escalated. But each of these scenarios leaves behind a pattern, a recognizable one. And here's where things feel off. The pattern wasn't clear. It didn't strongly point to speed. It didn't clearly show prolonged interaction. It just existed, incomplete. And incomplete patterns are dangerous because they can be forced into any narrative. Two facts that don't sit together. Now here's where the crack becomes visible. Not huge, but undeniable. On one side, authorities treated the case as a suspected abduction with signs of violence. That suggests urgency, movement, a situation that escalated quickly. On the other side, there was no immediate clarity on how that movement happened. No clear reconstruction, no confirmed path. Think about that. If someone was taken, there has to be a moment where they were moved, a transition from inside to outside. But that moment, it wasn't clearly defined. And when you place these two ideas next to each other, they don't fully connect. A violent abduction without a clearly understood transition point. That's not impossible, but it's not clean either. And remember, this was supposed to be a simple story, the noise that shouldn't exist. Then came something even more unsettling: the tips. At first, tips are normal in any case. People call in, they guess, they speculate. But this was different. The tips didn't just vary slightly, they contradicted each other completely. One claimed 3 individuals, another claimed 4, and then someone claimed to be alone, responsible for everything. Now stop for a second. Really think about this. In a case where the narrative is clear, tips tend to orbit around the same idea. They may differ in detail, but the core remains stable. Here, there was no stable core. It was chaos, different numbers, different stories, different versions of reality. And that kind of chaos doesn't come from nowhere. A psychological shift. At this point, something begins to happen inside the viewer's mind, not loudly, but quietly. You start to feel something you didn't feel before. Doubt. Not enough to reject everything, but enough to question it. And once doubt enters, the story changes. Because now, instead of accepting what you're told, you start analyzing it. You start asking, what if this isn't as simple as it looks? And that question is where the official story begins to lose its grip. The dangerous comfort of assumptions. Here's the truth most people don't realize. The original narrative wasn't built only on evidence, it was built on assumptions. Reasonable ones, logical ones, but still assumptions. And assumptions are fragile, because they collapse the moment reality doesn't match them. For example, assumption: one person acted alone. Reality: multiple tips suggest otherwise. Assumption: the event followed a clear sequence. Reality: the timeline remains unclear. Assumption: the case is straightforward. Reality: the details don't fully align. Each mismatch is small, but together they form a crack. This is where the story stops being simple. Not broken, not disproven, but no longer comfortable. Because now you can't ignore the inconsistencies. You can't pretend everything fits perfectly. And once that happens, the story you trusted starts to feel incomplete. The twist no one expected. But here's where it gets even more complicated. What if the conflicting tips aren't just noise? What if they're not random, not meaningless? What if they are fragments of something larger? Because sometimes truth doesn't come in a straight line. Sometimes it comes in pieces, broken, scattered, contradicting each other on the surface, but connected underneath. And if that's the case here, then the problem isn't that the tips don't match. The problem is that we've been trying to force them into a story that was never complete. And now you have to ask yourself, if one person didn't do this, then who did? If the timeline isn't clear, then what really happened inside that house? If the details don't align, then what are we missing? Because something is missing. You can feel it. Not a big, obvious clue, but something subtle, something hidden in plain sight. And that missing piece is what leads us forward. Not to answers, not yet, but to something even more important. The evidence that doesn't add up. At this point, you're no longer just listening to the story. You're feeling it. And something inside you is quietly saying, this doesn't fit. Not in a loud way, not in a dramatic way, but in a slow, uncomfortable way. Like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces almost connect, but never fully lock into place. Because now, we're not dealing with assumptions anymore. We're dealing with evidence, or at least what's being presented as evidence. And this is where everything becomes harder to ignore. think about this carefully. If this was truly one person, one decision, one sequence of events, then every piece of evidence should point in the same direction. Not perfectly, but generally. There should be a flow, a logic, a story you can follow from beginning to end. But here, the deeper you look, the more that flow disappears. And instead, you start seeing something else: conflict. The problem of simultaneous possibilities. Let's break this down slowly, because this part matters. There are moments in this case where different possibilities seem to exist at the same time. On one side, the narrative suggests a fast-moving event, a sudden act, something that happened quickly inside the home. But on the other side, there are elements that suggest time, more time than a single fast act would allow. Now ask yourself, how can something be both fast and extended? How can a situation feel rushed, but also leave behind signs that require more time to unfold? That's not just confusion, that's conflict. And conflict in evidence usually means one thing: the story is missing something. If they were here, then who was there? Now let's go even deeper, because this is where it stops being comfortable. Imagine the scene. One person enters, everything happens, they leave. Simple, right? But now consider this. There are indications through the growing number of claims that more than one perspective of the event exists. 3 people, 4 people, one person claiming everything. Now pause. Don't rush past this. If one person truly did everything, then why do multiple versions of the event feel structured instead of random? Because random lies don't usually align in patterns. They scatter, they fall apart. But here, even the contradictions feel organized.
And that leads to a very uncomfortable question. If one person was inside that house, then who created the details that suggest more? The physical limits no one talks about. Now let's step away from theory and talk about something very real: physical limits. Every action takes time. Every movement leaves traces. Every decision creates a sequence. So when investigators look at a scene, they don't just ask what happened. They ask, could one person realistically do all of this? And that's where things begin to fall apart. Because when you combine signs of struggle, movement from inside to outside, and a lack of a clearly defined sequence, you don't get clarity, you get pressure. Pressure on the idea that one person controlled everything. Now think about this carefully. An elderly woman inside her own home. If one person acted alone, they would need to control the situation, manage resistance, move quickly, and leave without being clearly tracked, all within an unclear timeline. Is that possible? Maybe. But does it feel complete? Or does it feel like something is missing? The missing minutes no one can explain. Every case has gaps, that's normal. But not all gaps are equal. Some gaps are small, harmless, explainable. Others feel like entire pieces of the story are gone. And in this case, there are moments that feel like they don't exist at all. Time that should be accounted for, but isn't. Moments where something must have happened, but no one can clearly say what. And when time disappears like that, it creates space. Space for more than one possibility. Space for more than one person. This doesn't feel like a mistake anymore. At first, it was easy to dismiss things. Oh, it's just confusion. People are overthinking. Not all details are public. But now, that explanation feels weak.
Because this isn't just one inconsistency. It's a pattern of conflicting claims, unclear timelines, incomplete sequences, and physical expectations that don't fully align. And patterns are dangerous because they don't go away, they grow. The emotional shift. At this point, something changes inside you. You're not just curious anymore, you're unsettled. Because now, you're starting to realize something deeper. This isn't just about what happened. It's about what doesn't make sense. And sometimes, what doesn't make sense is more important than what does. There's a moment in every case where everything stops feeling local, where it no longer feels like a quiet neighborhood mystery or a single incident inside one home, and starts feeling like something bigger, something heavier, something that requires attention from a level above everything else. That moment in this story, it didn't come with sirens. It didn't come with a press conference. It came quietly, hidden inside concern, inside pressure, inside one simple idea. This might be more than what it looks like. And when that idea begins to grow, there's only one direction it moves toward: the FBI. Think about this for a second. Why would a case like this, an elderly woman inside her own home, start attracting attention at a national level? Because not every case does. Not every disappearance crosses that line. So what makes this one different? It's not just the disappearance. It's not just the blood. It's the pattern forming underneath it all. And patterns are exactly what federal investigators are trained to see. When patterns start to matter. At the beginning, everything looked isolated. One house, one victim, one assumed event. But now, that isolation doesn't feel real anymore. Because when you step back and look at the pieces together, conflicting claims, multiple possible perpetrators, structured misinformation, it stops looking random and starts looking organized. Not confirmed, not proven, but suggestive. And suggestion is enough to trigger attention. The voice that changed the tone. Then came something important. Not loud, but serious. A former federal investigator spoke about the case. Not with certainty, but with concern. She didn't claim to have the answer. She didn't declare a conclusion. But she pointed at something that matters more than answers. Volume. The number of incoming tips. The variety of claims. The intensity of public involvement. And she said something that quietly changed everything. People are coming out of the woodwork. Now pause. Let that sit for a moment. That's not a normal sentence in a simple case. That's what you hear when something is drawing attention from multiple directions, when different people feel connected, when the story is no longer contained. The difference between chaos and structure. At first glance, everything looks chaotic. Different claims, different numbers, different versions. But here's the key question. Is this really chaos, or is it something else? Because true chaos doesn't repeat. It doesn't build. It doesn't create patterns. But structured activity? That's different. It creates noise on the surface while hiding consistency underneath. And that's what makes this moment dangerous. Because if what we're seeing is not chaos, but structured confusion, then this case changes completely. Behavioral indicators no one can ignore. Let's break this down in a simple way. When one person commits a crime, the behavior is usually contained. One set of decisions, one path, one psychological pattern. But when more than one person is involved, everything changes. You get overlapping actions, shared responsibility, divided roles, and sometimes conflicting traces. Now think about what we've seen so far. Conflicting claims, multiple possible scenarios, unclear timelines. These are not just investigative problems. They are behavioral indicators. Indicators that don't fully match a single individual acting alone. Again,
not proof, but not something you can ignore either.
The Bitcoin detail that feels off. Then there's another layer, one that feels small, but carries weight. Someone comes forward, claims responsibility, but instead of stepping into the light, they ask for something in return: Bitcoin. Now think about that. A person claiming involvement in something serious, but asking for payment before sharing information. Is that confession or manipulation? Because in many cases, this kind of behavior isn't about truth, it's about control. And control is rarely random. It suggests awareness, planning, understanding of how the system reacts. And that again pulls this case away from simplicity. Authority changes everything. Here's something most people don't realize. The moment the FBI becomes even remotely connected to a case, the way we see it changes instantly. Because authority creates trust. Even the possibility of federal involvement makes the situation feel more real, more serious, more complex. And in this case, that shift is happening quietly, not through confirmation, but through pressure, through the growing sense that local explanations may not be enough. This is the moment the theory changes. Up until now, you could still hold on to the idea that this was simple, that everything would eventually make sense. But now, that idea starts to slip. Because once patterns enter the picture, and once behavior starts suggesting coordination, you're no longer looking at a single path. You're looking at a network of possibilities. And that changes everything. Not just what happened, but how it happened, and who might be involved. The emotional weight of realization. This is the part people don't talk about. The moment when curiosity turns into something else, something heavier. Because now you're not just wondering what happened to her. You're realizing this might not be as contained as you hoped, that what happened inside that home may not have started there and may not have ended there either. That thought, it stays with you because it opens a door you can't close. And now you're left with one question. If this case is drawing attention, if patterns are forming, if behavior doesn't match simplicity, then what are investigators starting to see that hasn't been said yet? Because usually, by the time the public feels something is off, professionals have already noticed it. Quietly, carefully, piece by piece. The transition you don't even feel. At the beginning of this story, you were trying to understand what happened. Then you started questioning how it happened. Now, you're starting to ask something deeper. Who else could be involved? And once that question enters the story, it doesn't leave. It grows. It connects everything that came before, and it prepares you for what comes next. Because if this really is bigger than it looks, then the next step isn't just about evidence. It's about something far more unsettling. This is the moment the story stops feeling like a straight line and starts feeling like a web. At first, everything seemed to point in one direction. One victim, one incident, one simple explanation. But now, after everything we've seen so far, something new begins to form in the background of this case, not as a fact, not as a conclusion, but as a possibility that refuses to disappear. The idea that this was not done by one person, but more than one. And once that idea enters the story, everything you thought you understood starts to shift. Connecting this to what doesn't fit the official narrative. Remember what we saw earlier, things that didn't fully align, gaps in timing, conflicting details, unclear movement inside the case. Those weren't just loose ends, they were signals. And now, when you combine those signals with the growing number of conflicting claims, a new picture starts to form. a picture that doesn't stay inside the boundaries of a single individual. Think about it slowly. If one person did everything, the story should feel direct. Even if some details are missing, the overall structure should still hold. But here, the structure keeps shifting. Different voices describe different versions. 3 people involved, 4 people involved, one person claiming full responsibility. Now pause. Ask yourself something very simple. Why would one simple event produce so many different structured versions? Because randomness doesn't usually create patterns, but coordination sometimes does. The idea of roles instead of one person. Now let's step into the theory slowly, not as fact, but as a way to understand what doesn't fit. What if this wasn't one person acting alone, but different roles working together? Not chaos, but structure. In many complex cases, when more than one person is involved, roles often form naturally. 1. The planner, the one who thinks ahead, not necessarily present, but aware of timing, location, and opportunity. 2. The executor, the one who carries out the physical action, the one closest to the scene, the one people usually focus on. 3. The connector or cover role, the one who helps after the fact, cleaning details, delaying discovery, or confusing the timeline. Now, imagine these roles layered over this case. Suddenly, the confusion starts to look different, not like randomness, but like separation of responsibility. Step by step, a possible structure, not fact, only theory. Let's walk through a simple visualization, slowly, carefully. Imagine this. One person is responsible for setting things in motion. They are not seen, not directly involved in the physical moment, but they understand the situation. Another person enters the physical space. This is the moment everything changes. This is where the visible event happens.
And a third presence, even if not physically active, may influence what happens after. Not every role is loud. Some roles are silent. And that silence can create confusion later. Because when investigators look back, they don't just see actions, they see fragments. And fragments don't always reveal how many people were involved. Why group actions feel different. Here's something important to understand. When more than one person is involved in an event, the behavior often changes in subtle ways. It becomes more structured, more divided, less emotionally chaotic in one direction, more focused on roles instead of impulse. And what we are seeing in this case doesn't fully match a single emotional burst. It feels distributed, scattered across different interpretations. That's what makes people question it, not certainty, but inconsistency. The psychological shift. Now, something important happens inside the viewer's mind. At first, you try to hold on to the idea of one explanation because it's simple, comfortable, easy to accept. But as more conflicting versions appear, that simplicity starts to break, and your mind begins to ask, what if I've been looking at this the wrong way? That question is powerful because it doesn't accuse, it just opens a door. Imagine this for a moment. One person here, another here, and something happening between them that isn't fully visible. Not everything is happening in one place at one time. Some parts overlap. Some parts don't align perfectly. Some parts are missing entirely. And that's where confusion is born. But confusion doesn't always mean absence of truth. Sometimes it means multiple truths overlapping at once. The shock hidden in simplicity. Here's the twist most people miss. If this truly involved multiple people, it wouldn't necessarily look dramatic. It might actually look more controlled. Less emotional chaos, more coordination. Less randomness, more separation of tasks. And that is exactly what makes it harder to recognize. because people expect group crimes to look loud, messy, obvious. But in reality, some of the most coordinated situations look surprisingly calm on the surface, until you zoom in.
This isn't chaos. This is coordination. Now the idea becomes unavoidable, not as truth, but as possibility. Because when you combine conflicting structured claims, gaps in explanation, unclear timing, and multiple versions of responsibility, you don't just get confusion, you get layers. And layers suggest depth, and depth suggests more than one level of involvement. The emotional weight of this idea. This is where the story becomes heavier, not because something is proven, but because something feels possible that wasn't considered before. A single explanation starts to feel too small, too narrow, too incomplete. And once that feeling enters, it doesn't leave easily. The final question that changes everything. So now we reach the point where everything comes together. If one person did this, why does the structure feel divided? If the case is simple, why do the details behave like they belong to different versions of the same event? And if everything is truly as it seems, why does the story keep producing more questions instead of closure? Because now the focus shifts again. We are no longer just asking, what happened? We are now asking something deeper. What doesn't fit the official narrative? And that question is where everything starts to break open again. At this point in the story, nothing feels completely stable anymore. You've seen the official explanation, you've seen the assumptions, you've seen how quickly a simple narrative was formed. But now, we step into something deeper, not to reject everything, but to slow it down and ask one important question: what doesn't actually fit? Because sometimes, the truth isn't found in what is said, it's found in what quietly doesn't connect. The story that was supposed to be simple. At first, the narrative was clear, almost too clear. An elderly woman disappears. Evidence of possible violence is found. A suspected abduction is declared. And just like that, the story becomes structured. One direction, one assumption, one explanation. But real cases rarely stay that clean. And this is where the tension begins. Because the deeper you look, the more pieces start to feel slightly out of place. Not broken, not missing, just not fully aligned. The first thing that feels off, the silence between facts. Every investigation has silence, but not all silence is equal. In this case, there are moments where the timeline should feel solid, but instead it feels stretched. There are events that are mentioned, but not fully explained, and there are transitions between those events that are not clearly defined. Now, ask yourself slowly, if everything is known, why does the middle feel unclear? Because in strong cases, the structure is tight. Even if details are missing, the flow still holds. But here, the flow keeps breaking at different points, not loudly, but repeatedly. What didn't get enough attention? Now let's look at something important, not what is present, but what is not fully developed in the narrative. There are claims, there are statements, there are interpretations, but there are also areas that feel underexplained. How exactly the sequence unfolded, why certain timing gaps exist, why different accounts of involvement keep appearing, why some details remain unconfirmed. None of these are officially denied, but they are also not fully clarified. And that creates something important: space for doubt. The problem of incomplete statements. One of the strongest signals in any investigation is clarity of explanation. Even when facts are limited, a strong case usually builds a consistent picture. But here,
Some statements feel like they stop halfway, not incorrect, just unfinished, as if the explanation ends before the viewer's question does. And that creates a quiet tension, because the mind naturally tries to complete what is missing, but it cannot. Missing explanations that matter more than evidence. Now, let's slow down even more, because this is where the discomfort grows. There are questions that naturally appear from the information given, but they remain open.
For example, how did the situation unfold step by step inside the home? Why is the timeline not fully precise? What exactly connects the different claims circulating publicly? Why do multiple versions of involvement exist at the same time? These are not minor details, they are structural questions. And when structural questions remain open, the entire narrative feels incomplete. Not false, but unfinished. The psychological effect of controlled gaps. Here's something subtle but powerful. When information is missing in a random way, the mind usually accepts it as noise. But when missing information appears in key structural points, the mind reacts differently. It starts to pay attention. It starts to question intent. Because gaps in important places don't feel accidental. They feel meaningful, even when they are not. And that's where suspicion begins to grow. The contrast that creates doubt. Let's compare two things. On one side, a clear label of suspected abduction, a clear mention of possible violence, a clear direction of investigation. On the other, unclear sequence of events, unresolved timeline gaps, conflicting external claims. Now place them together. One side is structured, the other is fragmented. And the human mind struggles with that imbalance, because it expects both sides of a story to match in clarity. The hidden weight of conflicting claims. Now there is something else building in the background. Multiple versions of what may have happened. Different numbers, different explanations, different interpretations. 3 individuals, 4 individuals, 1 individual. Each version feels confident in itself, but none fully align with the others. Now ask the critical question. If the situation is truly understood, why does understanding produce so many different outcomes? Because clarity usually produces convergence, not divergence. And divergence creates uncertainty. The emotional shift begins here. At this point in the story, something changes inside the viewer. You are no longer just listening, you are comparing, you are analyzing, you are noticing patterns. And more importantly, you are noticing what doesn't match. This is the moment where simple belief becomes difficult, not because something is proven wrong, but because it no longer feels fully complete. The idea of edited reality. There is another subtle feeling that begins to appear here. The feeling that some parts of the narrative are fully visible, while others feel slightly distant. Not hidden, but not fully expanded either. And when that happens, the mind starts to wonder, what is fully known and what is only partially shown? Because incomplete clarity always creates curiosity, and curiosity always demands more. The deepest question so far. Now everything leads to one core thought. If the official narrative is correct, why do so many small pieces feel slightly disconnected? If the timeline is accurate, why does it feel like something is missing between moments? If the explanation is complete, why does the story keep producing more questions instead of fewer? The tension that cannot be ignored. At this stage, you are standing between two feelings. One part of you wants to accept the simplicity of the explanation. The other part notices the inconsistencies. And neither side fully wins, because the story is not fully stable in either direction. The quiet truth about this phase. This is not the moment of conclusion. This is the moment of recognition. Recognition that something doesn't fully connect. Recognition that some answers feel incomplete. Recognition that the structure of the story is not as smooth as it first appeared. And once you reach this point, you can't unsee it. The final shift toward the ending. Now the story moves into its final emotional stage. Because once doubt settles in, the mind naturally searches for closure. It wants answers. It wants certainty. It wants resolution. But instead of clarity, what it finds are questions that remain open. And that leads us directly into the final stage of this journey, where everything that has been building up finally leads to one place: the unanswered questions. Transition. Because even after all the theories, all the claims, all the analysis, there are still things that have not been explained. And those unanswered questions are where this story truly ends, for now. Now we reach the end. But not the kind of end where everything is solved. Not the kind where all answers fall into place. This is the kind of ending that stays with you. Quiet, heavy, unfinished. Because even after everything we've seen, there are still questions that refuse to disappear. Not loud questions, not dramatic ones, but the kind that sit in your mind long after the story is over. And once they enter, they don't leave easily. The first question that won't go away. Let's go back to the beginning for a moment, just for a second. A simple case, a missing woman, a house with signs of disturbance. That was the official starting point. But now, after everything, ask yourself, who was really inside that house that day? One person or more? Because nothing we've seen fully settles that question. Not the timeline, not the evidence, not the conflicting claims. It all circles back to the same uncertainty. The question of the second presence. There is something unsettling about patterns that don't stay consistent. So now the question becomes, if one person did this, why does it feel like more than one version exists? And if more than one version exists, then which one is real? Or are they all fragments of something larger? That thought alone is enough to change how you see everything before it. Was someone helping or watching? Another question rises quietly in the background, not obvious, but persistent. If there were multiple behaviors involved in this case, then what was the role of each one? Was one person acting alone while the other was unaware? Or was there coordination, or silence, or something in between? And more importantly, was someone protecting someone else after the fact? Because sometimes the most important actions are not what happens during the moment, but what happens after. The missing time that never fully returned. Every case has time gaps, but not every gap feels meaningful. This one does. And that leads to one final realization. Maybe the problem isn't that the story is wrong. Maybe the problem is that it is not complete. The question no one wants to ask out loud. Now everything slows down. The noise fades, and only one question remains. Not spoken loudly, but felt deeply. If this was not a simple case, then what was it? Because every explanation so far has left something behind, something unresolved, something still waiting. And that something is what keeps this story alive, even after it ends. The loop back to the beginning. Remember the very first idea? A missing woman,
a quiet home, a simple explanation. That's where everything started. But now, at the end, that simplicity doesn't feel complete anymore. It feels like the surface of something deeper, something we only saw pieces of, not the full picture. The final silence. And now, there is no new information, no final answer, no confirmed resolution, just silence and questions that stay behind. Final question. So we leave you with this, not as a conclusion, but as an echo. If the theory is true, then what really happened inside that house? And more importantly, why does the story still not feel finished? Because sometimes the most powerful endings are not answers. They are the questions that refuse to die.
There are moments in the story where things should be clear, but instead, they disappear into uncertainty. No clean explanation, no fully reconstructed sequence, just space, empty space. And that space keeps asking one thing. What happened during the moments no one can explain? Because missing time is never just missing time. It always means something happened there, even if we don't know what. Why do so many stories exist? Now step back again. Look at everything together. One claim says 3 people, another says 4, another says 1. And none of them fully cancel the others. They just exist at the same time. And that raises a deeper question. Why does one event produce so many different structured versions? Is it confusion? Is it misinformation? Or is it incomplete understanding of something more complex? Because the more versions exist, the harder it becomes to believe there is only one simple truth. Was something deliberately hidden? Now we enter more uncomfortable territory. Not accusation, not conclusion, just possibility. There are parts of the narrative that feel complete and others that feel unfinished. So the question becomes, was everything shared or only what could be confirmed at the time? Because sometimes investigations don't hide things intentionally. They simply don't yet have the full picture. But to the outside world, it can feel the same, and that feeling creates doubt. The moment everything feels connected and unclear. Here's the strange contradiction in this case. The more you try to organize the story, the more it shifts. You try to simplify it, but it becomes more layered. You try to fix it into one explanation, but it keeps splitting into multiple possibilities.